This is
the Independent
Filmmaker's Guide
from Framework Productions.
Framework
Productions.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Independent Filmmaker's Guide, where we talk all things indie films, the nuts and bolts of literally how movies get made. And specifically, our focus, and what got us into this in the first place, is how independent movies and films get made. But one thing we can take for granted, a question that I believe is usually assumed and thus rarely questioned, is what is independent filmmaking? And how does it differ from, say, a studio film? And why is that so important? Well, I want to answer that in part today with regards to some very recent news. So part of how movies get made is with writers and actors, and sometimes films employ writers and actors who are members of guilds or unions. With that in mind, we wanted to come on here today and talk about this news I just mentioned. The first time in 63 years strike where SAG-AFTRA has joined the WGA in a labor stoppage due to stalled negotiations with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, or the AMPTP, a term we have undoubtedly heard and mispronounced a lot recently. We did have another usual episode planned to release today, but have decided to replace it with our statement that we here at IFG stand firmly with our fellow actors and writers in this strike. We hope that at the end of this, we will see them protected for their talents and compensated duly for their work. Now, to the indie versus studio difference. Easy. Some producers are members of the AMPTP and some are not. When we think or talk about the big studios or blockbuster films these days, these are simply colloquial inferences to the AMPTP. It is literally the difference between independent producers and not. Hey, so there you have it. End of story. Well, not quite. This may be the technical difference, but this strike also helps us understand how these differences actually function, and why independent films are so important to a healthy industry, and how we all, in some form, are wrapped up in this strike. In broad strokes, it is the members of the AMPTP who are the ones who negotiate contracts with the union. If you're not a member, there is no seat at the table. Once a basic agreement is made between the AMPTP and the union, these become the basis of all contracts that any other producer, say those without a seat or the independent filmmaker, must sign in order to work with that union. This could be anyone, from an individual to a production company you may already be familiar with. The difference is, though, they are not represented or do not, quote, have a seat at the table in these negotiations. They must therefore follow what was agreed to by those members in those negotiations. Now, while SAG-AFTRA has struck all contracts related to and negotiated with the AMPTP members specifically, in recognition that indie producers did not have a seat at the table where the negotiations were taking place, it has offered the ability for them to apply for interim agreements. Again, those who are not affiliated with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. This is important because those films which are independently financed can have the opportunity to continue to work while the pressure remains on the AMPTP to come back to the table. This is also being sure that to the best of SAG-AFTRA's ability, the strike remains against, therefore, who it is intended to be against, and keep the collateral damage at a minimum. Again, IFG is in firm support of this strike. This feels like an inflection point for the industry on every level. The stakes are high, and we hope that a modern contract is agreed to, and that independent filmmaking remains a thriving and supportive part of our awesome industry, helping us all tell the stories each of us want to share. Now, for more information about all of this and everything I was talking about today, and also how to support, be it with donations or picket lines, please go to sagaftrastrike.org. And thank you for joining us for this episode of the Independent Filmmaker's Guide. Filmmaking is a collaborative experience, as is this podcast. So be sure to follow us on Instagram at framework_productions. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to IFG wherever you get your podcasts. But no matter where you do listen, if you could also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts specifically, that really is one of the best ways to broaden and strengthen our community, as well as just helping us make these episodes better. Speaking of, if there's something you'd like for us to cover on a future episode, we are now on Discord. Just look in the show notes for more. IFG, How Movies Get Made.